Downtown is where the Chargers want to be, but San Diego officials say fat chance of getting voters to agree. Looks like opponents of a development along the shore of a Carlsbad lagoon will be celebrating. A trolley janitor sues after getting roughed up by MTS officers accused of excessive force in the past. And a battle between fellow Republicans ends with the incumbent county supervisor still standing. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are sports writer Jay Paris, 1090 Sports Radio. Hi, Jay.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you back again today. KPBS North County reporter Allison St. John. Hi, Allison.
Great to be here, Mark.
I'm glad you're here. Reporter Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego. Hi, Andy.
How we doing, Mark?
Good to have you back. And reporter Joshua Stewart of the San Diego Union Tribune. Good afternoon, or good day to you.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Well, if the Chargers are going to stay, downtown is where they'll play. That's the announcement this week from team owner Dean Spanos and the response from Mayor Kevin Faulkner and County Supervisor Ron Roberts. Good luck with that downtown idea. Jay, start with the Spanos vision. What are we talking about here?
Well, they want to expand really the convention center, but they want to do it on the other side of Harbor. And they want to do it next to Petco Park and put a convention center in there and maybe put a football stadium up above it, if you will. And you know, the city has other plans. The mayor has his own vision, his own idea that he wants to extend the convention center right there on the bayfront footprint, make it continuous, you know, the big word that they like to throw away down
They don't
there.
want this satellite idea.
No, they don't want somebody walking from, you know, Exhibit Hall A across the bridge and over to really Petco Park. And they're going to meet a lot of opposition because those hotel people, they don't like people crossing Harbor. They like to keep them right over there, keep them drinking and eating as well.
Well, you wonder about the conventioneers. They want to go to the kiddies table. They want to stay in the big convention center.
They want to stay at the big place. And so, you know, the mayor has his own plan. And it looks like, you know, there's very few things people can agree on this thing, but they do agree on everybody's got to be pulling that rope in the same direction. And right now, really, the Chargers, the proposal is the city's not for it, the county's not for it, Comic-Con's not for it, and even some fans aren't for it because they can't tailgate anymore. So other than that, it's full steam ahead.
Now, the Chargers say they gave that Mission Valley Qualcomm proposal that had been worked up by the mayor and Ron Roberts and their task force. They gave it full, fair consideration, but they favored downtown. Why do they want downtown?
You know, I hate to use this word sexier when we're talking about buildings and football teams, but, you know, just the vision and the blimp shots of seeing the gas lamp and seeing Petco and seeing this convention center and seeing a football field, that all would just look great, I think. But I think something else that has to be considered is that the optics of a stadium, a standalone stadium, for a billionaire in a $15 billion industry, that's going to be a tough sell. Now, if you can sell that as part of a convention center, part of keeping Comic-Con, and that old property at Mission Valley, we can, you know, San Diego State can use that, maybe UCSD.
So
maybe it's a bigger picture, but just a stadium out by itself in a parking lot might be a tougher sell.
Yeah. Now, a lot of analysts have looked at downtown versus Mission Valley. What do they say? It's going to be more expensive.
Yeah, especially the guys that want the convention center where it is. You know, they don't own a lot of that land down there. It's going to take longer. It's going to be more cost more money, and it's just more complicated, I think is the word we're really looking for. County Supervisor Ron Roberts said they might be able to build something down there, check back in 2024. I mean, they got to move the bus yard. There's a lot of moving parts down there, and that's why really it hasn't been done before.
Well, and as the Chargers were saying a year ago here, you're looking at maybe a two-thirds vote of voters here to approve anything in terms of a tax. Andy, I mean, we're going to get a vote for that?
Well, so that's one of the most interesting things to watch is the Chargers are getting on board with this Corey Briggs plan that does all these various things. And that's all well and good if, in fact, you can get this done with a 50% voter approval. The mayor's office and the hotel industry have been adamant that that's just not going to happen, that it's going to end up reaching that 66% voter threshold. The difference being, if you are raising taxes to put it in the city's general fund, at which point the city council can disperse that money to their own discretion, that's a 50% voter threshold. But if you're just doing one thing with it, then you need 66%. So the Chargers are making this case, and Corey Briggs and Donna Fry, who are also involved in this, are making this case that this does a lot of things, and because the money will initially start with a TOT, a transient occupancy tax increase that goes into the general fund, that this is a 50% issue. The question is whether they've really just found a a clever legal workaround the 66% issue. And if it is, and this is a novel use of the law to get to lower the threshold, well, then somebody's going to want to challenge that in court.
And normally that would be Corey Briggs, who, as you say, they're marrying up with.
Right, which is maybe part of the calculation. However, former city councilman and now radio jockey Carl DeMaio has already said that he's probably going to try to challenge it. So, I mean, the chances of that going forward, even if it's successful, without being challenged in court, are pretty nil, I think.
And are Corey Briggs and the Chargers actually exactly on the same page? I thought that there were some differences in their visions.
Well, the Chargers this week came out and said, we like the Corey Briggs plan. They're in discussions about whether they'll have to do something above and beyond that, which would potentially mean 2 ballot measures on the November ballot.
This November, yeah.
Yeah, that would be the Corey Briggs plan plus a Chargers plan that deals with some other.
So what is it the Chargers want that is beyond what Corey Briggs' plan would?
Well, it's just that the plan doesn't necessarily spell out, the Briggs plan doesn't necessarily spell out each and every detail that's going to be required of some of these complicated things. So where do the operations fall? Is this on the city? Is this on the Chargers? Where does that parse out? If there are cost overruns, who goes on the line for that? It's a very very complicated thing, and there might need to be some additional clarity that could be brought by a Charger-specific ballot measure.
All right, we got short time left. Joshua, go ahead.
Well, keep in mind that there could be an additional ballot measure for the Sandag half-cent sales tax increase as well. That'll be a lot of different taxes that voters would have to consider all at one time.
And approve them all.
And approve them all, too.
All right, one last...
22 from the state, potentially. Potentially 22 state measures.
Right. Oh. Well, this brings us all back to what we were talking about at the outset, which is this is now a political campaign, but the Chargers have kind of been looking down their nose at the fans of San Diego, thinking they were going to get that Carson deal, which fell through.
Right.
How do you sell it now after you've...
it wasn't really a deep well to begin with, and that well was poisoned a lot last year. I mean, they went to bed early with the Raiders. I mean, they're arch enemies. So now maybe every good tale needs an enemy or needs a bad guy. Maybe the bad guy is going to end up being Faulkner in the city with their competing plans. So, you mentioned it with Corey Briggs and Donna Fry and Dean Spanos. I mean, those three people joining forces. I mean, that's like Donald Trump, Mitt Romney, and Jeb Bush going out on a camp out or something. Those three people coming together is just amazing.
All right, well, we'll see how the camp out all works out and who winds up as strange bedfellows, which politics breeds. All right, we're going to move on. It appears an upscale retail and dining development planned along a Carlsbad Lagoon has been rejected by voters. Allison, this was a real expensive nail biter here and close. Give us the standing now. What is it with Measure A?
Yes, I mean, it looks like it's going down. The gap between the yes and the no votes is only increasing as they count the last, it was 7,000 ballots, and that number is shrinking, but the gap between the yes and the no is growing, so it definitely does not look good for this project. And this was really a precedent-setting project. It spent more money than any other special election in San Diego County history, $10.5 million. It's kind of a fairy tale that the voters, the money didn't matter. The voters just didn't want it, and so it's going down in spite of that investment on the part of the developer.
All right, now remind us what the project was. Give us kind of a thumbnail overview of where this was and what it was.
The developer, LA-based Rick Caruso, wanted to build this very high-end Nordstrom-anchored shopping, dining, retail center. It was sort of a destination place where you would go and perhaps spend the day and eat and shop and walk on the open space, because there was 3 miles of open space trails, and that's a beautiful location. Anyone who's driven up 5 and you look to the right and you see the lagoon there, I mean, a beautiful location. You can see why Rick Caruso really wanted to build his project there.
Okay, up on the lagoon there in Carlsbad.
Agua Hedionda Lagoon.
Yeah, no, so Andy, you got 85% of this was open space. It seemed like the best of all worlds here. Why were people opposed? Who was really opposed to it?
Well, so that 2 interesting questions. One is the opposition would make the argument, and it's a pretty good one, is that it was already secured as open space. So the claim that this would once and for all ensure that this additional open space would stay open space is a little questionable. It was already pretty much secured as open space. The interesting thing about the opposition, they were outspent 10-1, and there was a very strong grassroots opposition to this. Worth noting that 10-1, the one there came from rival mall developer nearby, Westfield.
He didn't want a competitor.
Yeah, didn't want a competitor. Now, the community is going to come back, and I'm sure my inbox is already filling up with reminders that they were very much on the side of altruism, and that they just didn't like this project, and that why should they be expected to turn down Westfield's money? But to be clear, there was a competing interest here that decided to spend some money on this race, and it probably helped.
Okay.
Well,
Allison?
you say it helped, but I have to say that this issue about money, it magnifies a message, and obviously you would think that if the message was a good one, $10 million would win. But in this case, obviously the message wasn't good enough for people to vote for it in spite of $10 million magnifying it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a steady political science emphasis on the fact that you have depreciating returns. You get a lot of money early on, and then as you spend more and more and more, you get less and less. By the time
especially in a small market where
but by the time they spent their 10th million, I imagine that there weren't many people who were hearing
not getting
the first time.
the bang for that buck, Jay.
Allison, do you think so? That the way this thing came about, it seemed kind of like a backdoor thing, and
Yes.
they went through the city council, and
Yes.
they kind of, I want to say backroom deal, but it seemed like it kind of took the local community and activists by surprise. But wait, what are we?
Even although the developer said, I've spent 3 years talking to all the people that matter in
Right.
Carlsbad, many people hadn't heard about it at all until signatures started to be gathered last summer. And yes, this is the first time in San Diego County that a developer has decided to avoid the CEQA process, which is very rigorous and very expensive and difficult to get through, and decide to take advantage of a Supreme Court ruling and go straight for the voters and say, okay, if you vote for it, we can go ahead with this. But the problem was, and I think he got off on the wrong foot here, because rather than putting it on the ballot, the city council decided to go ahead and approve it. And that left people feeling like, wait a minute, we signed these petitions thinking that we were going to find out more about this, make up our own minds, and instead the city council just goes ahead and approves it? What's this? And that was what really created the indignation that I think fired a lot of the second round of signature gathering and the second referendum.
Yeah, and now, and so now, there's indications that he's going to end up going back through the CEQA process and kind of do it the old-fashioned way. So,
well, have you heard from him that he's thinking of it? Because
no, there's speculation out there.
I mean,
haven't heard
when I asked
anything.
him about that, he said, by law, I can't do this for a year. And you get the sense that he's pretty exhausted from having fought and spent this much money.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's going to come back. That's remains to be seen.
Now, if he doesn't do it, will somebody else?
Well, yes. I mean, that site is definitely a prime location.
And part of it's zone 4 commercial?
Yes, it's going to. Some of it is going to be zoned for commercial anyway.
Okay.
It's just that particular project, some people argued, was more dense and was going to attract more people, almost as many as Disneyland, 12 million people a year.
Wow.
So Carlsbad residents were worried that this was just more than they really wanted in their village.
And we should be ready. We're going to see more of this. This is a relatively new Supreme Court ruling that's just opened the opportunity for developers to pursue this strategy. This was the first one here. The Chargers opposition up in L.A. in Inglewood used the same thing, and then a very controversial development that we've talked about on the show before in Valley Center, Lilac Hills Ranch has already started to do the same thing as well.
Well, what about the loss here now? What does that say to some of these folks? I'll leave this last question up before we leave this topic, but does this say this is kind of a warning shot across the bow?
Well, I don't know what you think, Andy, but with Lilac Hills, it seems like that is a bit of a different situation because it's a housing development. And this was a mall, a shopping center, let's call it. And we can live without a shopping center, but San Diego's housing situation is very dire. We really need more affordable housing. And I think if they collect enough signatures from the whole region, and it's a county-wide initiative, many people might say, well, we need more housing. Let's build it in them their hills, and it's different from doing it in a local area where people have a local
I think that's exactly the crucial difference is because it's in the unincorporated portion of the county in Lilac Hills, when it goes to a vote, you'll have people by the border in South County voting on this issue, and are they going to feel as angry about the potential project?
That's many miles away from them.
That's 40 miles away. Exactly. In Carlsbad, you were dealing with all people who had some reason to feel a vested interest in it.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to seeing what happens as we move ahead with that story. Next, we've got a story jointly reported by Voice of San Diego and NBC7 San Diego investigates. A newly hired trolley cleaner, Alan Coca, was asked for his ID by an MTS security officer. He didn't have it. Here's how that incident went down.
You're in an area where only employees can
Come on, brother. Every day.
Okay, here's what's gonna happen. Here's what's gonna happen.
Every day I'm come here.
Here's what's gonna happen. After I get done running you, I'm gonna issue a citation.
A citation for trespassing. Video shows more MTS officers surrounding Coca, who begins to get agitated.
He's got a horrible attitude.
Next, Coca calls his brother, who also works at the MTS yard. Then, his janitorial supervisor arrives.
Come my boss said, what do you want?
We're not interested in your boss.
This guy won't.
But next is the basis of a lawsuit Coca filed against the MTS, 2 of the transit officers, and the janitorial company.
You're being cited for entering transit
Don't
property.
talk to me nothing. Give me
without-
that sign.
Okay. Right here on the X.
Before signing, Coca says his brother cautions him in Arabic not to sign a citation he doesn't understand.
What's this? What does it say here?
Without admitting any guilt, you're being cited for entering transit property not open to the public.
He's saying, he come.
All right, so tell us what happened from there. And for our radio folks here, that's a long video from the police officer's cam. And what happened? How did this thing escalate?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting video to watch, and one thing that I think is interesting about it is often when we have police body camera footage or surveillance or just captured footage, people say, well, you're only watching right at the moment that things turn violent, you've taken it out of context. This is actually most infuriating, I think, if you watch the entire 30-minute video and see that it began with a miscommunication that was probably very reasonable. They have every right to ask why this person
They
is
being
on
the MTS officers.
and
Yeah.
that's their job to figure out why this person is on their facility. And when he doesn't have his ID, he says, look, I just started the job. They told me they weren't going to give it to me right away. And they said, well, we're going to need to talk to your supervisor. By the time he gets his supervisor over to them, they say, we don't care about your supervisor. We just don't like your attitude. And then they continue writing him a citation for trespassing. He refuses to sign it. And eventually they say, we're arresting you, and turn around and let me cuff you. And he says, I'm not doing that. And they grab him by the throat, throw him to the ground. It gets very violent at that point. You kind of can't really see what's happening. It's just kind of lights flashing around, a lot of people moving. Long story short, he gets taken to the hospital. There, one of the MTS officers reported to the doctor in the ER that he had been knocked unconscious during the fight. That he got hit on the head and he was actually out cold for a little while. Okay. So it was a very, very violent instance.
All right. So who is Alan Coca, and why didn't he have an ID here? He was on the job. Everybody agrees at this point. Yeah, he was hired by the janitorial company.
Yeah, and so certainly the janitorial company bears some of the responsibility here. He's a Baghdadi immigrant. He's been here for a little while. His brother's been here before him. He had actually just a little bit earlier, he had been visiting in Turkey and got stabbed in the stomach. He was recovering from that surgery, and he was so in the video you hear him screaming, my stomach, I just had surgery. He got the job. He lives in El Cajon. He got the job, and basically when he reported for his first day, his supervisor told him, listen, this is a really crummy job. We have a lot of turnover. A lot of people don't like it. Why don't you do it for a little while before we bother running your paperwork and
expensive process, give you an ID,
and we'll, if you like the job, then we'll do your thing. And interestingly, he was actually there with his Social Security card on him that day to finalize the process. So it actually opens the question of, like, how do you get the security clearance if when you report to the place with your information to get the security clearance, you end up being arraigned for trespassing.
Yeah. Now tell us about these officers. Do they have the power to arrest? They're not police officers, right?
No. So they're basically they're certified as security guards. They have the power to write citations for the specific violations that are written out in MTS's policy, and they have the power to detain people temporarily to bring until actual police officers in whatever jurisdiction they're operating. Usually that's STPD, but if they're in Lemon Grove, for instance, then it becomes the Sheriff's Department. Then those people can actually do an arrest. Otherwise, they can write misdemeanor tickets. That sort
Did they arrest this guy that night?
They told him he was going to be arrested. When he woke up in the morning, he had been issued citations. He never went to jail, but they gave him citations for trespassing and for basically striking an officer. He hires a criminal attorney thinking he's been charged with a crime. The criminal attorney says, I can't find any evidence that you've ever been charged with anything. So somewhere between those two things, the charges were.
And he's turned around and sued. What's the status of that case now? Because this was a late 2014 incident.
Yeah, it's still open right now. It's been heard in closed session by the MTS board. Just a couple days before this exact incident, the two officers who were involved were the subject of a previous settlement from another incident, and one of those officers has been involved in 3 other settlements for use of force as well.
So they're still on the job, though.
Yeah.
All right. One last quick question before we leave this. When will this be resolved? Do we have any idea what's going on with the lawsuit?
You know, we all love our legal system. That's not something I'm going to be able to forecast. It's, you know, if they decide to settle, then maybe there's an opportunity to do that. I think, obviously, Alan Koch and his lawyer feel like they have a pretty good case. The whole thing was captured on film. So.
All right, very good. All right, well, we'll follow up and see what happens as this case moves on. Well, it's almost unheard of for an incumbent county supervisor to face a serious political threat in San Diego County. Even more rare when the opponent, the upstart, is a fellow Republican. But that was the case for longtime Supervisor Dianne Jacob. Joshua, who went after Jacob, and why did he think he had a shot here?
Joel Anderson went after Dianne Jacob, the incumbent of 24 years. He thought he had a shot, largely from what I'm hearing, but based on one of her votes on land use. You know, that was a small crack in her armor, and he went for it. He quickly received the support, both an endorsement and a $200,000 contribution from the county Republicans, which made him a quick contender and competitive candidate against the incumbent.
That's a lot of money in a supervisor's race right now. And how rare is that? I mean, you haven't seen that kind of a donation, right?
That is the second largest contribution, single contribution that the county Republicans have made since 2000, and the single largest since 2012. So it's quite a bit. It's a major.
She is a Republican. Dianne Jacob's a Republican.
She is, yeah.
Usually the Republican Party does not go after an incumbent unless they really feel strongly that she's not following the
what was their beef with Dianne Jacob?
It's largely that she was not read enough. They wanted someone that was much more hardline Republican.
She's too reasonable for him.
I mean, she's too far to the center.
And this is where the Republican Party seems to be getting into trouble, is that when the moderates come up, they don't support them, like Rocky Chavez in that in the Senate race. It seems like the Republican Party is determined to back people who are possibly unelectable.
Well, now that's an interesting point you make, Allison. So are they more in step, the county Republicans, with the National Party on that matter of ideology, and out of step with San Diego voters? What's your thought on that?
I mean, I think they certainly are, probably a step a little bit to the right of most voters, but typically party, headquarters usually are. Most people are moderates or aren't the hardliners within their own party.
And a lot are independents, of course, in this
particularly
region.
in San Diego.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the mayor is considered, San Diego mayor is a moderate Republican.
Yeah, one of the top moderates in the whole country. I think he's the only Republican mayor among the top 10 city mayors in America.
Yeah, and it's worth giving the Republican Party a little bit of credit. They elected to run Mayor Faulkner over Carl DeMaio. He was a further right candidate that would have pushed them the other way. So they tend to the center from time to time as well. Certainly Joel Anderson, challenging Dianne Jacob from the right is a different story than that. But I think they had maybe are not quite. It's not quite the same story that you see nationally, where you see people regularly being primaried from the right.
Yeah, that's very unusual. Allison?
So, I mean, do you think that this land use issue is really becoming a central issue in the election coming up?
I'm not hearing it much at all. I'm hearing more about fire protection. That's the biggest thing out there. East County, that's always a risk, and people are concerned about that.
And Dianne Jacob has a strong record on fire protection.
Yeah, there's been a series of initiatives that she's worked on.
Yeah. What is the specific land use issue or issues that we're talking about here?
Well, she, as opposed to, I mean, in our county we have Supervisor Bill Horn, who represents the unincorporated areas in the north, and Dianne Jacob, who represents the unincorporated areas in the southern part of our eastern county. And Bill Horn is much more pro-development, and Dianne Jacob is very much representing her constituents to try to prevent there be large developments in her area, which in fact is in tune with the general plan.
All right, so it looks like she's a shoe-in to the election now. She'll have a Democratic opponent. Does that person have any chance against the incumbent?
Rudy Reyes ran against her once before, and
trounced.
That's a diplomatic way of putting it. He's running again. He thinks he could get double what he got last year, which would still put him under 50%.
Yeah.
So, sorry, not last year, last election. So it's an uphill battle for him, and he trails in voter registration.
All right, we'll certainly watch that as we move forward in this election year. We're going to shift abruptly now, Jay, and come right back to you quickly. We've got less than a minute left. Update on the team already downtown. We talked about the Chargers wanting to go there. The Padres, different Padres this year. They're going to contend. They're going to take the Western Division, right?
Well, that's what you say.
No, that's not what I say.
Yeah, well,
many
you know,
analysts
it's
do.
a different vibe than last year. That's for sure. They brought in the big names last year, and guys you recognize are bubblegum cards. This is more of a homegrown effort, and they're hoping to under-promise and overwhelm and over-deliver. And we'll see what's happening. The big news, really, a new manager in Andy Green, a young guy earning his stripes. So far, he's won over the clubhouse. Now see if that translates to the ball field.
A lot of young players will get a shot. Then.
A lot of young players are getting a shot, and they're hoping to do it with pitching and defense and
just like
small
everybody.
ball.
All right.
Got it.
Well, we'll see what happens as the baseball season plays out as well. That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Jay Paris of 1090 Sports Radio, Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego, Allison St. John of KPBS News, and Joshua Stewart of the San Diego Union Tribune. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.
You can always go downtown when you've got worries. All the noise and the hurry seems to help, I know. Downtown, just listen to the music of the traffic in the city. Linger on the sidewalk where the neon signs are pretty. How can you lose? The lights are much brighter there. You can't forget all your troubles, forget all your cares, so go down.